on this episode of Insight. What's the deal with ultra-processed foods? Angie, you're a mum of two. They're 6 and 1. What are some foods that are on regular rotation in your house?
I'll say firstly, the inevitable happened and my husband and I eat a different meal than the kids. So, like, for the kids, it's obviously, like, up there is, like, sausages, the usual, like, dino nuggets, those sorts of processed foods. I'm fully aware of how bad these products are, but he loves anything that's, like, cookies, pea chips, any crackers, no sauce on the pasta. That's a big no-go. Yeah, anything saucy, anything that's got any remote flavour like spices. That's the 6-year-old. The younger one is still easy and will eat everything. I really noticed when my eldest turned around 2, he entered into that ubiquitous beige stage and it kind of hasn't really quite faded. But I'm hoping the second child maybe it will be different.
You're a chef. How does your eldest feel about your home cooking?
He's indifferent to it. I try to liken it to, like, imagine if you drew a picture and I just kept throwing that picture in the bin. That's kind of how I feel when I make you dinner and you don't eat it and I throw it in the bin.
I understand you make muffins.
Yeah.
How does he respond to those?
If you go to the supermarket and you go to, like, the baked goods aisle and there's all those, like... So he's like, oh, Mummy, I want this, I want that. But then I was like, OK, let's do a homemade version of it. And I, like, snuck in all these whole grains and bran and grated vegetables and nuts. And even though, like, at the time, carrot cake was his favourite thing, we put grated carrot and he's like, no, don't like it, tastes like carrot.
Is there anything your son likes that you've tried to replicate at home?
Yes. He went through a stage of loving bird's eye fish fingers and, yep, there they are. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to make them and I'm going to, like, put them in little rectangles and shape them, and made them with local blackfish where I live, and, yeah, he was not fooled.
Really? Didn't like them?
I tried. Look, they look just like them.
As someone who's passionate about food, how do you feel about the snacks that your son prefers?
It's really hard. You expect as a parent, you have all these ideals. I'm a chef, I'm educated in food nutrition, all of these things, but inevitably you fall back to those things because it's like, oh, OK, just eat them. And so you are constantly just like, here's a pack of chips, here's a pack of cookies, here's a pack of lollies. And after-school activities turns into, do I get a bag of lollies at this after swimming lessons? And that becomes like a routine that's really hard to get out of.
Natasha, you're also a mum. How do you feel about cooking?
Oh, I hate cooking. I get no pleasure out of cooking at all, ever have. So for me, the quickest thing that I can find to feed my family, and I'm good with that. My husband is amazing. He eats everything and anything that I cook. And my girls are good. With me, it's just jarred sauces and, we're having this and it makes me look professional, but it's not. It's done in 10 to 12 minutes and it's on the table.
Why don't you like cooking?
My mum, I feel horrible saying it, but I'm in my 50s, so growing up was the 70s, and women were still stay-at-home mums. My dad used to have a 3-course meal, entree, main, dessert, all that sort of thing, and my mum never enjoyed it, so I think watching her never get pleasure out of it was just something that I just saw it was just a job that you had to do.
How do you make your life easier for yourself when you're preparing meals for your family?
If I can get a jarred sauce or even potato bake and stuff like that, you can buy it in the tray and just put it in the oven and it's done. It's just whatever way we can work it out. The other week I made my version of shepherd's pie, which wasn't the real version. It was just the meat, and then I just cooked the potato, shoved it at the bottom of the plate, put the meat and cheese on top and went, there you go. Because I didn't see the point of the next step.
So using sort of ultra-processed foods actually helps you out?
Yeah.
Antonio, you're a big fan of meat pies. Why do you love them so much?
Meat pies for me is quite nostalgic, something that I wasn't really exposed to until I was 8 when I first came to Australia. I have a vivid memory of being at the Liverpool pools at the aquatic centre, and my dad bought me my first pie. Came in a tin, but I didn't even know how to eat it. So I literally used a fork and just forked everything, all the filling out of it, and my dad ate the rest. So that was my first, nostalgic memory and is still ingrained. But also the fact now that pies come in all shapes and sizes and all the fillings are now different. It just doesn't have to be just meat and gravy. It could be anything. It could be butter chicken. It could be Thai green curry. So it's quite versatile now.
Do you consider meat pies to be ultra-processed?
It depends. I think if it comes in a packet, if it's on a shelf, then I would say yes. But you can also get pies that are made with, whole ingredients from a local bakery that, might source their ingredients locally, made that day and then sold that day. Not all pies are the same.
Let's unpack the difference between processed and ultra-processed foods.
From fermenting grains to make beer to canning fruits, processed foods have been part of the human diet for tens of thousands of years. So, what makes something ultra-processed? Take the humble potato, a whole or unprocessed food. If cooked at home with 2 or 3 ingredients like salt and fats like pure butter or lard, it would be considered processed. So-called ultra-processing occurs when the food is created at an industrial level, with ingredients extracted from whole foods, combined with things like preservatives, colours or flavours, and packaged up ready to eat immediately, or with minimal preparation.
Philip, you co-authored a global review into ultra-processed foods, which are also known as UPFs. We have a table up on the screen. What are we looking at here?
We are looking at the Nova food classification. Now, this is a food classification that differentiates food not by their nutrient content, but by the degree and the purpose of processing. Now, on the left-hand side, you have the unprocessed or minimally processed foods. These are your fruits, your veggies, your meat, your seafood, your fungi like mushrooms, your beans, your lentils. And these are what have made up the basis of human diets for thousands of years. The second are processed culinary ingredients. These are just things that we use to cook with at home. You can see there salt, butter, olive oil, for example. The third category are processed foods. And you've got bread there. That's a loaf of sourdough. And sourdough has been made by humans for probably 50,000 years. It has water, flour, salt, and yeast. It's absolutely delicious. Now, when you move to the ultra-processed food category, you get into a category of foods that's only been around since really after World War II, but it only probably became a large part of our diet in the 1980s and 1990s onwards. They're more products than foods. They are made in factories. They contain ingredients that you would never use in your kitchen. These include the emulsifiers, the gums, the flavourings, the colourings, the modified starches, the protein isolates. These are ingredients that are only used by the corporations or companies that manufacture these foods. Now, the other defining feature of ultra-processed foods is that they're really intensively branded and marketed to us. They are also the most profitable way of making food. And that is part of a really fundamental part of the explanation for why ultra-processed foods are taking over.
How much ultra-processed food are we eating?
In Australia, we're eating somewhere between 40 and 50% of our calories from ultra-processed foods. So if this were the Olympic Games of ultra-processed foods, we would be right up there on the podium with the United States, with Canada, and the United Kingdom. This compares to, say, France, which gets about 30% of its calories from ultra-processed foods. Italy is about 20%. China is just 10%. These countries are very different, not just in terms of their food culture, income levels, that kind of thing, but also because of the power and the influence of the ultra-processed food industry itself and the intensity of the marketing.
In terms of age groups, are there age groups that eat more ultra-processed foods over others?
The highest consuming Australians are typically teenage boys or girls who are getting somewhere between 70 and 80% of their diet from ultra-processed foods. This is something we're really concerned about.
Do you think most of us know that ultra-processed foods are such a big part of our diet?
I don't think so. When people think about unhealthy food, they tend to think of these discretionary foods, the obvious ones, the potato chips, the sugary drinks, the confectionery and chocolate bars. But ultra-processed foods are much broader than that category that we'd otherwise talk about. And that's a really key thing to understand, is that over time in Australia, for every version of those first 3 categories that I spoke about before, there has become an ultra-processed category. We used to have just processed pies. Now we have ultra-processed pies. We used to just have bread. Now we have ultra-processed bread. Yogurt, ultra-processed yogurt. tofu, ultra-processed tofu, the list goes on. And that's because it's more profitable to make ultra-processed the product than just to make it processed or minimally processed.
Antonio, your family is from Myanmar. Were ultra-processed foods part of your diet growing up?
No, Asian parents don't show affection through words and physical touch. So the way that they showed their appreciation to me was through food. So I couldn't remember a day where I didn't come home from work or school where a home-cooked meal wasn't prepared. So I think that had a lot to do with not having a lot of processed food.
Leo, you're from France. You've been living in Australia for a little bit over a year. What were your first impressions of Aussie food culture?
Not many vegetables. And here it's like, teaching people about food. In France, we speak about food all the time. At lunch, we speak about the next dinner. And at dinner, we speak about lunch and the one next month, the ones before. And if a lunch was very, very good, we speak about it for the next couple of years.
Have you noticed differences in how Australians cook?
Yes, oui. I've noticed that when people cook here, for example, when Australians make a salad, most people will use a processed sauce seasoning from Woolies, for example. And in France, we make a sauce with just olive oil, vinegar, and mustard, and that's it. And so when I make just a normal sauce here, my wife or even just friends are like, "Wow, this is so good!" So I'm happy. I'm a chef here.
Danny, you're a child of the 90s. What kinds of food did you eat growing up in Australia?
My childhood was very highly ultra-processed. As long as we had our meat and 3 veg for dinner, I think the concept was they would burn it off. So breakfasts were Cocoa Pops, rice bubbles with sugar on top, Weet-Bix with sugar on top, Pop-Tarts, tiny teddies, shapes, chips, Nutella, ham sandwiches on white Wonder White bread, and McDonald's, yeah, all that kind of thing.
In your late 30s, your health declined. What happened?
So last year, when I was 39, my baby was 7 months old, I started feeling very fatigued. I'm a runner, I'm very fit, and I went to the doctor, had some blood tests done, I was highly anemic, and then 10 days later, a colonoscopy showed that I had bowel cancer.
What went through your mind when you were diagnosed with bowel cancer?
I couldn't believe it. I was healthy and fit. I'm a mum of 4. I'd spent the last 10 years of my life really focused on that and changing it. I'm a nutrition and fitness coach. I pride myself in home cooking, and I always say I'm going to live to 100. I'm going to be 100 and running a marathon. And my first thought was my baby wasn't going to know who I was. And I just didn't understand. It didn't make any sense to me. It's what I preached. I preached healthy living. How was I getting cancer? Like, it just didn't make any sense.
Do you have any idea what caused your cancer?
So as you can imagine, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole when I got diagnosed. I love reading research papers, and my mum's actually a doctor. So we went down a bit of a rabbit hole together. After looking at other studies and things and talking to a lot of different people, alongside other contributing factors, of course, it's not just the ultra-processed food, but one of the common denominators was this big influx of ultra-processed food through the 90s.
Did you talk to your surgeon about what you thought it might have been caused by, at least partly caused by?
Yeah, so in my surgeon's appointment, I did ask him what he thought, and I was, I suppose, shocked because it almost validated what I had thought and found out. And he said, interruption to the gut microbiome through chemicals in our food and our environment.
Philip, what are we learning about the impacts of ultra-processed foods in our diets?
Well, we conducted this huge study last year, published in the medical journal The Lancet, which evaluated all of the evidence that we have on how ultra-processed foods are impacting on human health. So there's diversity of evidence, and all of that is pointing towards a very firm causal relationship between having more ultra-processed food in the diet and a very strong association with weight gain and obesity and a number of diet-related chronic diseases. They include type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancers, chronic kidney disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and I should also add mental ill health as well, depression and anxiety. And what we concluded from this study is that these health impacts are affecting all of our body organ systems, our gastrointestinal system, our cardiovascular, our neurological and brain system, amongst others. So we concluded from this that there is something about an ultra-processed diet. So this is the share of ultra-processed foods in your diet. When that gets to a high level, that is causing systemic low-grade inflammation in our bodies. It's affecting all body organ systems, and that we as humans are poorly adapted to consuming these foods and the ingredients that they contain. These are not, in evolutionary terms, we are not adapted to these diets.
Are the concerns, do you think, around the additives or the way that these foods are processed?
It's both. Because when you ultra-process a product, and you're doing a lot of things to it, first of all, you're dehydrating the products. They tend to be lower in water content. You're putting in more sugar, you're putting in more fat, you're putting in more modified starches. But we also know that these products are designed to make them irresistible. Once you pop, you can't stop. The colorings, the flavorings, the emulsifiers, the gums, the non-sugar sweeteners, these are all about engineering the products to make us eat more of the food. Now, adding on to that, so it's not just singular additives, it's a cocktail of additives that you find in different types of products. And some of these additives have quite well-known, and there's a lot of emerging science here as well, well-known impacts on the human body. So, for example, like emulsifiers, could be scrubbing our gut like a detergent, removing or degrading the lining of our gut, disrupting the microflora, contributing to leaky gut and inflammation. And inflammation, as I said, is a big reason for why they might be harmful. I could go on and on. There's a whole range of other ways in which ultra-processed foods are impacting on our health, but perhaps I'll pause there.
Flavia, you're a nutrition scientist and you've received funding from governments and the food industry. How do you feel about the term ultra-processed food?
I think it's a sexy term. It's a lot sexier than discretionary foods, which is what in nutrition science we've had. You know, it's based on nutrient profiles of foods. From a nutrition science value perspective, I don't think it adds anything more to what we already knew. We already knew that you shouldn't have sugar-sweetened beverages and chips and all those packaged foods that have very little whole foods in them, that provide very little nutrition, that disrupted the food matrix. That's all things that we already know for the past 20 years in nutrition science. And it's not adding anything new, whereas it can really create unintended consequences for consumers where someone might not be getting their fiber because they're avoiding a bread that's a really good source of fiber because it's in category 4, and then not having it at all, which then will impact your gut microbiome, which will impact all the health risks that we know that fiber is so important for, that micronutrients are so important for. So it's a really blunt tool, and it doesn't add any more value to what we already know in nutrition science while creating those unintended consequences.
What does it mean for those of us trying to make sense of it all, going to the shops, buying things?
Exactly. So if someone's sitting there choosing between 2 yogurts, and there's a yogurt with an emulsifier and a yogurt that doesn't have it, or they actually go, well, I can't afford that yogurt, so I'm just not going to have yogurt at all, then it means they might be avoiding that food and avoiding all the 10 to 15 essential nutrients that are in the yogurt. So I fear that by creating this arbitrary category that's purely descriptive, there's no way to really enforce, well, what is, what isn't. Experts can't even agree on where you put the category, and there's so much error in the science. Then how are consumers going to sit there and go, well, which yogurt should I have, or which bread should I have? And these are foods that can provide a lot of nutrition, including iodine, fiber, and so many different micronutrients that we know support health and lower chronic disease risk.
What do you think, Philip? Why should our focus be on ultra-processed foods and not discretionary or sort of junk foods?
The term discretionary food actually doesn't really have much of a scientific basis. If you look, it's in our dietary guidelines, but then if you look at the number of studies that actually apply that term discretionary food scientifically, it's very limited. The body of evidence that we have using this descriptor ultra-processed food, and it is a classification system that has been well designed, validated across many different independent research groups in many different countries around the world, applied very effectively. So it is a reliable way of measuring people's diets, especially the degree of processing and the degree of ultra-processed food in the diet. But I'd also say that I'm a firm believer that Australians have a right to know what they're eating in their food. You can choose between the ultra-processed version of the yogurt or just the yogurt.
What if it's a choice between ultra-processed yogurt or no yogurt at all?
Yeah, but you still have a right to know as a consumer.
Can we eat any ultra-processed foods safely?
I mean, I'm not the food police here. I'm not advocating to take away anyone's Tim Tams or, whatever.
You'd be arrested.
Yeah. I would be, right? What the evidence says is that if the share of your diet becomes high in ultra-processed foods, that's what's having the impact on our health. It's not about having the odd meat pie. It's not about having the odd Tim Tam. It's if that share of the diet starts to get up to 20, 30, 50, 80%, we're going to start seeing these really negative health outcomes. We're not going to be as effective at school, outside of work, in our recreation and our play. Like a high ultra-processed diet is going to be impacting, right across society in these ways.
Danny, you're eating almost 90% whole foods these days. Have you been surprised that some staples are actually ultra-processed?
Yes. One thing that a few years ago that I was really shocked at was bread. Even the nice, fancy-looking bread brands, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say brands, but that look nice, they have the good marketing, it says it's great. Once you do turn that packet over and you realise, the thickeners and the emulsifiers and even sometimes, the seed oils that are added into those products, when now I make my own bread and I know that bread is just water, flour and salt. Everyone thinks, like you said before, that junk food is the chips and the chocolate and the sweets, but actually the ultra-processed foods are sneaking into our everyday diets more often than you think.
Was it difficult to remove most ultra-processed foods from your diet and from your kids' diets?
There's always that, I suppose, overwhelmed feeling of, okay, what are we going to do? And I think, that's, I talk about, making slow changes over time, like start at one thing, and we started with breakfast. I removed the Wheat Bix, which has the added sugar in it, and started making oats, and then I removed the muesli bars and, started making my own things. And I suppose it's just also about having those conversations with the family about what's going on. We have a very open, honest, no BS thing in our house. This is how it is and this is why we're doing it. And I think that conversation is really important. But over time, as you start slowly introducing them, and then you realise how much better you're feeling and how much more energy, and actually, it's actually not costing any more money, really, and especially when the outcome on health is so much more positive.
Angela, you try to avoid going to the supermarket. Why is that?
Yeah, I get tempted. I get very tempted. That's why I have a love-hate. There's, if I buy a box of the cheap cornettos, like $3 something, I'll eat the 4. I just want to eat the one after the other.
Do you come out with what you went in for?
So my strategy is to go in with no trolley. That's a balancing act, but it works. It really helps me a lot.
I went on my weekly shop and spoke with nutrition scientist Claire Collins to see if ultra-processed foods are sneaking into my trolley. So I'm just picking up a few more things. I've done a shop already at a couple of other supermarkets, and last of my weekly shop. This is the naughty section where I'm tempted by everything. Claire, I've separated out what I think are the ultra-processed foods. I've put what I think are ultra-processed here on this side, everything else on the other side. And I want you to tell me how I've done.
You probably guessed these ones.
I did. Look, I was on the fence about this. I didn't feel like they say, for example, in the same category as chocolate.
It's very challenging, isn't it? But one of the things is, are the ingredients things that your grandma and grandpa would have had in their kitchen? Could you actually make this food at home? This almond milk, I really want to put it over here. And the reason for that is, again, if you look at that ingredient list, have you got these in your cupboard? Food additives can play a really important role. The challenge today is there's a lot of food additives in a lot of foods.
Is it fair to have all these items in the same ultra-processed category? To me, they kind of look different.
It's not fair. Ideally, we'd have a hierarchy of ultra-processing and a hierarchy of the additives that are being used.
I want to talk to you about the stars because the sweets I like have 5 stars on them. The eggs have 4. How does that work?
This is so confusing for people. So the trick about these stars is you can't compare that to those things.
I can't cross categories.
No, it's only within categories. So if you're trying to make the healthiest choice within categories, then stars are really helpful.
So do the stars take ultra-processing into account?
Actually, they don't. So the challenge is you can have a lot of stars but still be ultra-processed.
Duncan, your association, which represents the bulk of Australia's food, drink and grocery suppliers, was involved in developing health star ratings. Are they effective?
It was really designed there to help consumers identify healthier options within a category of food, just like the clip said then. So it incorporates a calculation based on negative nutrients, so things like sodium, sugar, saturated fat, amount of energy, but also incorporates positive nutrients, so those nutrients that we actually want to see more of in the diet. So fibre, protein, fruits, vegetables, nuts and legumes. So a product that scores a higher score will have either less of those negative or risk nutrients and more of the positive nutrients.
We've heard the health star ratings don't take ultra-processing into account. Do you think they should?
The health star rating is based off decades of nutritional science, where the focus is on those key risk nutrients and positive components as well. Ultra-processed food terminology ignores nutritional outcomes. It is focused just on the way the food's produced or the presence of certain ingredients. And I think if it was incorporated in something like ultra-processed food, it would be confusing for consumers to differentiate a healthy or from a not healthy food, but also penalise those foods that actually contribute significant nutrients in a balanced diet.
Philip, your research specialty is public health. Do you feel the star ratings are effective?
No, I do not. The health star rating system has been around for just over 10 years now. And when it was brought into place, it was voluntary. So companies could decide whether or not they wanted to put it on their products. As a result of that, we've seen the health star rating being put onto products that score very favourably, including many ultra-processed food products getting 3, 4, even 5 stars. So we concluded in this global study that we did that the health star rating system has been co-opted as a marketing tool and not as an effective public health measure. Now, the food ministers have decided to put into place a process for considering to make it mandatory. However, we actually advocate for Australia to take a completely different approach, which is to adopt warning labels, which have been adopted in countries right across the world. The most effective way to inform Australian consumers about making healthy choices. The health star rating system is a graded system. So products can get anywhere from 0 to 5 stars. And we're seeing these ultra-processed food products getting 3, 4, 5 stars. They shouldn't be getting any stars at all. Now, unlike other countries which have decided to keep the food industry out of the policy-making room, the Australian government has decided to design healthy food policy in Australia with the food industry in the room. If you look at the Healthy Food Partnership, which is the body that makes decisions and discusses these things, 9 out of the 15 members are food industry groups. Are they making policy in the interests of Australians and public health or in the interests of the industry?
Duncan, are health star ratings marketing?
No, they are a government developed tool. Yes, industry was part of that process in terms of developing the system, as were public health experts and other government representatives as well. It really is there as a tool to help consumers make healthier choices.
Do you think most people understand the health star system?
I think there's obviously room to improve consumer understanding through educational or promotional material to enable consumers to understand how to use the health star rating system, particularly that way it is to be used comparing within food categories.
Angela, do health star ratings help you at the supermarket?
So when I turned that biscuit packet over, it had 1 star, and I thought that must be really bad. But if I saw something like a warning that was an ultra-processed food, I wouldn't want to touch it. So if I saw something that was quick and easy on it, you don't need to put your glasses on, you don't need to have 3 kids hanging off a trolley and it's a headache.
What worries you about ultra-processed foods?
My whole family has multiple autoimmune conditions and mine have become very bad. I struggle just getting through days. It's not outwardly appearing, but it's very challenging. And so I've got ADHD. I have a problem with attention. It's petty, but it's like the chips are screaming at me. It's like, don't touch them, don't touch them.
Flavia, you're a nutrition scientist. Should we be avoiding UPFs?
Most of the foods that are UPF aren't health-promoting foods. They're foods that we've known for many years that are high in nutrition, that they don't have a lot of whole food in them, that the feed matrix, which is important, is disrupted, and that affects, how we absorb the nutrients in the food. So most of it is not really health-promoting. So from a general, broad perspective, yes, there's a lot of foods that are UPF that we should avoid, but the category is so broad that there's also a lot of healthful foods within that category that we shouldn't be avoiding.
Like what, for example?
So, for example, commercial bread, it's one of the top sources of fiber in our diet, which is a top priority nutrient that my colleagues and I published on. There's 6 nutrients that Australians aren't getting enough of, from 4 years to age to 70 plus, and calcium's one of them, vitamin D, fiber, omega-3 fatty acids, folate, and magnesium. And so what happens when you have these foods like bread or yogurt that might have some additives that makes it UPF, or a plant-based milk that, for a child that is dairy intolerant that needs to get their calcium, they're going to then all of a sudden be avoiding it because it's UPF. Nutrition, unfortunately, affects every single system in our body, and it's really hard to separate this ultra-processing concept from actual really poor foods and dietary patterns.
Danny, you've cut out almost all ultra-processed foods. Do you make any exceptions?
Absolutely, of course. For myself specifically, I love a piece of chocolate at night with my tea. On the weekend, we will share a backpack of crisps as a family, but I always look at it as a scope over the whole day and the whole week of what everyone's diets are looking like. And if I know we've had too much of something, then it might be a no. But if I know that we've fed the family whole foods for the most part, then that ice cream on a Friday or the chips on a Sunday is not doing anything.
Do you feel like you're lacking any nutrients?
No, not at all. No, I also make sure that we're getting different nutrients from different parts. But that takes preparation, it just takes time. And unfortunately, people don't prioritise their health and they do go for the quick things. And I'm busy. I have 4 kids and 2 businesses and we have no family around, but I make that a priority because I now know that adverse health outcomes that come from poor diet. And I had children and I have a responsibility to ensure that they thrive long term. It's my responsibility.
Janine, you live on a disability pension. How selective can you be when you're doing the groceries?
I think choice is a privilege. About 4 years ago, I decided that I wasn't going to consume so much, so I decided to cut back on everything. And one of the things I looked at was food, how to not waste so much food. So then I found myself directed towards like food barns and places where people in lower socioeconomic areas could access food. And then when I went to the food barns, that a lot of the food is shelf food. It is what is donated is food that sits on a shelf for a long time. And so the options became narrower and narrower. My husband and I said, right, they do have stuff you can buy and they do give away fruits and vegetables, but they go really quickly. So I then looked at like what was left and there's tons of bread. I don't particularly like it, but my husband loves it and that's free and the vegetables are free. And then all the other stuff is shelf foods.
When you go shopping, do you have a shopping list or
No, no, we definitely don't. It's what we need, not what we want. We don't have many options. I enjoy plant-based foods. I like plant-based. My husband loves steak. You're not getting steak there. So, it's just a matter of weighing up what's there, what is less on the shelf, and what is more natural and more healthy.
How do you manage, say, that vegetarian sort of diet?
We do eat processed foods. We have to because that's what's available to us.
Ben, you also think your food selections are restricted at the shops. Why is that?
I live with celiac disease, so I was diagnosed back in 2020. It's a really restrictive diet, and that's one of the things. It is such a restrictive diet in the first place, but yeah, a lot of gluten-free foods, they do contain a lot of additives and colours, and they basically just put sweeteners and put a lot more sugar into the products to make up for that lack of gluten a lot of the time. It's quite scary sometimes looking at the back of a packet and seeing all of the ingredients on there, and then sometimes looking at a gluten-containing counterpart and thinking, why isn't there as many ingredients in that one?
How do you feel about eating UPFs?
I think I probably have like a middle approach to it. Snacks are basically my friend. Like if I can't get my hands on a apple or banana or something, then I will just grab like a nut bar or something that is ultra processed, and I know that it's ultra processed, but at the same time it's going to get me to that next meal, and I use it as that sort of tool.
You've been gluten-free for 6 years. Is shopping becoming any easier for you and your family now?
Absolutely, but definitely come a long way since then, and sort of using processed foods in combination with a more whole food diet. And I guess, a positive that's come out of the celiac diagnosis is that I've really become passionate about cooking and baking at home. My wife's a fantastic cook, but we sort of, share that role now, and I really enjoy that. And so I'm trying to do that more, making my own bread, and just making a lot more, cuisines and different styles of cooking, which sort of, stops me having to rely on processed food so much too.
Angie, you're a parent and a chef. Is time and convenience a factor when you're feeding your 6-year-old?
Yes, yeah. I pack the lunch in the morning. And like back to what we were saying before about the health stars, I'm sorry, but they're a bit of a farce. A can of Coke Zero has got a 3.5 star rating, and a packet of Medjool dates has 1 star. So if I wasn't as educated about food as I am, and I went into a supermarket, I wouldn't realise that I could put the Medjool dates in my kid's lunchbox, and that's a really healthy, like sugar option, high sugar option to keep him going, because he's like much more of a snacker. He's like too busy to sit down and like eat a whole sandwich. And that's part of it, knowing that if I want him to eat what's in his lunchbox, it's got to be fast. And so, of course, all those ultra-processed foods are really soft, really fast, easy to consume. And so that kind of comes into it. And we try not to talk about things that are good for our bodies, but rather like food that gives us energy, or food that maybe, helps us go to the toilet, or things like that. We talk about foods in that will make us strong. I don't want to restrict him. I don't want to say no to the chocolate. And I'm lucky he eats 90% dark chocolate. I don't want to say no to that, because I don't want him then to become, an adult, and then he's shopping for himself and he just layers all his food is just processed food because he's not allowed it before.
Danny, you have 4 kids and your diet is almost entirely whole foods. How do you feed your family and manage that?
I don't overcomplicate it. I actually don't give them options. I kind of just deliver the food, and this is what, the only thing I'll ask is, what do you want for this week's snack? And my 7-year-old she decides what the 4-year-olds are going to have. They're twins. But, I do spend a couple of hours on a weekend prepping because it's just so important to me. So, I will bake a banana bread, or sometimes I do 2 banana breads and pop one in the freezer, so the next weekend I don't have to do that banana bread. And I make a batch of muffins. But I do make sure it's quick. I will make some sausage rolls, I'll get it all organised, and I'll just sort of smash it out so that I know that my kids are going off with nutritious foods that are keeping them full, that are fueling their brains, and I know that they're going to be satiated during the school day.
You also limit your children's UPF intake. How do other parents respond when they hear that?
Yeah, I get loads of backlash, which I find very wild. Yeah, people think that I'm judging them from feeding my kids whole foods, and I'm lucky that I'm able to cook, and I'm lucky I have the time, which I don't have the time. I make the time. It's almost like the schoolyard sometimes, to be honest.
What about you, Natasha? Is there ever judgment around your use of convenience foods rather than cooking from scratch?
Yeah, I probably have people more laugh at me than with me by the way I talk about it, because for me it's just all about getting it done as quick as I can. So it's more just about, I do what's best for me and for my family in my way, and kudos to all the mums and dads that cook, and I think you're all amazing to spend that time in the kitchen. But I think we've just, as a society, just instead of being critical of mums that don't want their children to eat processed foods, let's just start working together a bit more and just accepting people, and let's just stick with, bringing up decent humans and not concentrate on all these other things.
Karen, you're the principal at a primary school in regional New South Wales. How is your school dealing with ultra-processed foods?
We hired a chef and we're feeding all of our children, so we've got 160 children, and our chef's just got an incredible understanding of food and processed food and the ingredients in it. So we use little to no processed food in our program. We call it the Eat Well, Feel Well, Learn Well program at our school. Parents pay $5 a day. $3 of that goes to the food and $2 of that goes to paying the chef her salary. Last year we put on an apprentice chef, so we're sort of seeing this real circular sort of economy being built in it. We really try and use local ingredients where we can. We source local honey, we're using local mushrooms. All of our meat we try and source as much as possible locally. There's some organic farmers that we've tried to tap into. Of course, the cost of that sort of, sometimes puts us out of the market. But we've had such a massive impact on our community. It's been a real community thing.
What inspired this idea?
I wear two hats. I'm a mum. I'm a sole parent of 3 children who are now grown adults. And the bane of my existence working full-time in a school was always that lunchbox. It was making sure it was healthy. If you look at the Japanese model, it's beautiful. It's really thought about deeply and it's really valued. And that's what we're trying to do at Berrima.
How did the parents respond to the new program?
We rang every parent. So my assistant principals and I was feeding this, probably for 2 years. What if we, if you always go into things with curiosity, I was always saying, what if we did this? How would that be? So we were sort of getting momentum there. We got some funding. We were very lucky to get some funding. We already had a really strong culture around food. We were one of the first Stephanie Alexander kitchen garden programs. So we already had children in the garden, seed to table idea. We already had children cooking in our kitchen. So it was kind of the next logical step for us. And it was really about not absolving parents of the responsibility. I don't want to do that. Schools get enough of that. Schools can take care of this, schools can take care of that. It was really important that we weren't absolving them of that responsibility, but it was pooling our resources together and what could we do for the common good, for our children.
Were any parents sort of anxious that maybe their child mightn't eat the food that was going to be provided that day?
I was actually really shocked when we rang the families. The anxiety that was coming, my child won't eat this, they won't try that, they won't do this. I would say 60 to 70% of the families that we called, we had 96 at the time, 3 years ago. I was getting a lot of my children won't. And we were sort of, hope we're doing the right thing here, because it was a really big risk that we were taking. We were really asking them to trust in us. We really wanted them to know that we were using really good ingredients. We were not using seed oils. Anything that we were sweetening was with applesauce or dates, or trying to be as healthy as we could in that space. And we were really fortunate that 98% of the families put their trust in us, and we started. There was dishes, oh my goodness, the amount of dishes. I just can't get over how many dishes we were washing. I'd go to staff meetings with a tea towel over my shoulder, forgetting that I had it because we were down in the kitchen.
How did the students respond to their new lunches?
There was quite a lot of excitement. We'd really built this up. We had a ceremony where we threw our lunchboxes away. So it was this really big idea about being a community. And as a community, we're doing this because we're fueling our bodies and we're fueling our brains for learning. But we were getting some really agitated children in the first 4 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, to the point that I was sort of standing there looking at my colleagues going, oh my God, what have we done? This was not supposed to happen. It was all supposed to be amazing for children. We had boys bringing lollies in and selling them on the bus. Oh. We had this sort of underground lolly thing start to happen. And after all this effort, we sort of went down into a bit of a pit and thought, have we done the right thing here? But we got our curiosity on and we went, what is this? What are they showing us here? Kids show us all sorts of things through their behaviour. And we put it down to they were actually having a sugar withdrawal. They were bringing sugar in. We were finding lolly wrappers. We'd been a fairly healthy school before that. That was not something that we had noticed before.
Wow.
But all of a sudden we'd notice, Snickers bars wrappers or lolly wrappers around the place. And we're like, what's this all about? And I can say this year we've still had that little dip, but nowhere near what it was.
How do you know if this is making a difference for your students?
Yeah, look, we know it is, absolutely 100%. We've had Flinders University come in and do, in our first 12 months, a research program. But we went into this as a long game. We went into this with the idea that we're planting the seed of a tree that we're not going to sit underneath the shade of that tree. And we're really okay about that. I think the unintended outcomes have been really interesting though. We have a lot of grandparents come in and help cut up fruit, and it's given them a lovely purposeful activity to do. And it sort of brings back those days when, mums used to sit around and shell the peas or, strip the beans off. That sort of thing's happening, which is really lovely for our community. We'd have about a dozen grandparents that are coming in that space. We did Clean Up Australia Day this year. We had a little bag of rubbish. There was just no rubbish around the school. It's giving children a deeper understanding of what they're putting in their mouth. They're thinking about what they're putting in their mouth. We've still got kids that struggle with it, but on the whole, the shifts we've seen in what they'll eat in vegetables and fruit is just amazing.
Angela, you live in public housing and you grow some of your own food. How has this worked for you?
It means I don't have to leave the house. Yes, and that's really good. This is the community garden.
Oh, great.
So we teach people in public housing how to grow food, and we utilise everything that's there because we don't have money. Not 1 cent in funding is given to us by anyone, and we use what's there. So that's chopped up bananas for feeds the soil. It's all permaculture.
Danny, you were diagnosed with bowel cancer almost 12 months ago. How is your health now?
I am under surveillance. I had clear scans last October, which was great. I am under some genetic testing at the moment though. My tumour did show a rare gene mutation in it, so I am just waiting to find out if that's a gene that I've created myself, which then would sort of, substantiate some of the things I believe that contribute to my cancer. As my other genetic tests came back not genetic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for those of us who also want to cut back on ultra-processed foods?
Well, I think it's very overwhelming, especially if you're a family that does eat a lot of ultra-processed foods. So just taking one step at a time. I help parents all the time just make small changes, and sit down and have those conversations with your kids and be really open and honest about what you're doing. I say if it's just start with breakfast, if you can just start swapping out breakfast cereals to some rolled oats or some eggs on some, fresh sourdough, and then do that for a few weeks and then move on to the next thing and talk to your kids about why and how it's making them feel and get them involved in the kitchen as well. I know trust me, when I cook for my kids, it's not fun, but at least I'm getting them involved and having those conversations, and then they get proud of what we've created as well. So I think it's about taking some really baby steps and not trying to do everything all at once.
Good luck with your health.
Thank you.
Thank you. Angie, your son prefers ultra-processed snacks. Do you think his tastes will change as he grows up?
Yeah, definitely. We actually eat very well in our house. Because we live in a small town, literally the only place to eat is the pub. So, of course, we're there, once every couple of weeks we have dinner there, but I'm cooking dinner every night for the family, and it is often natural foods from scratch, and he's exposed to that. I know because of his bizarre tastes, his love of broccoli and caviar, it's only going to go one direction, and hopefully it's going to improve.
Do you ever feel like you need to restrict anything, or do you think he'll find his own way?
No, so we had our local show this year, and it's a bit like the Easter show, like a local agricultural show, and there's always a sideshow alley, and someone came up to him and gave him this 3-kilo bucket of fairy floss. And they were like, here, and he's like, oh my God, delicious. And I was like, oh God, okay, there you go, sure. And you know what? He had a handful of it. Was like, I'm done. That's enough. And I think that is the best possible outcome. Because had I said, no, you can't have that, I'd probably find him climbing out of bed in the middle of the night in the pantry, eating it all. He's taught himself self-regulation, and that's really important to me. And Hopefully I can educate them how to cook well and eat well, but also be fully aware that we live in this society that has these foods around us, and it's okay to have them sometimes. There's a reason we don't drop dead when we eat a pack of chips. It's okay, but if you're eating those chips every single day, there's the problem.
Thank you so much, and thank you to you all for being here. Thank you for your company. You can catch up on this episode or any others on SBS On Demand. I'll see you soon.